Hello and welcome to the Ecumetrics podcast. Today I'm talking to Richard Lusk, Senior Director of Data Science at quick service restaurant Inspire Brands. Today we're going to be talking about what has brought him to Inspire Brands and the journey he's had in data science, and particularly around the journey of in-housing marketing optimization capability. Welcome, Richard, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Sona. Glad to be here.
So before we get into the conversation, I'm sure Inspire Brands is a large organization, but for our listeners to understand really what are the brands within that and an understanding of the scale and scope of the company, would you be able to explain a little bit about Inspire Brands?
Yeah, absolutely. So Inspire is a 5-year-old company. And right now it is the second largest restaurant company in the United States. So around the world, we have 32,000 locations, and that includes 650,000 team members, about $27 billion a year in annual sales. And we're in over 65 countries. So it's a pretty big operation. The only company really larger in the world is McDonald's for serving food.
And what are some of those big brands that you have, Richard?
Yeah, so we have 3 brands that do over $1 billion in sales a year. So that includes Arby's, Baskin Robbins, Buffalo Wild Wings, Dunkin', Jimmy John's, and Sonic Drive-Ins.
A lot of American favorites, I'm sure.
Yes.
In terms of your how you've ended up, obviously, today you are a director of data science at Inspire Brands. What has been your career journey so far? You know, going from financial services to consulting, and now in the QSR space. What has that journey been like, and what has brought you to Inspire Brands?
After grad school, I had an opportunity to work in banking, and so I spent several years at JP Morgan Chase. At that point, data science as a term was really just starting to take off, and the blend between analytics and data science and kind of where does that line fall wasn't really defined at the time. And banking was fantastic. Banking has always been kind of at the cutting edge of advanced analytics and data science methods. Artificial networks and other kind of really advanced machine learning algorithms had been, employed by banks 20 years ago. And so it was a fantastic place to start a career. And after a few years, though, I was kind of interested in getting a little bit more variety. So banks are very interesting from an analytics perspective. You get access to a lot of data. You can ask a lot of questions, but banks tend to move fairly slow. And I was kind of interested in seeing, what else, where can I get a little bit more variety? And so I had an opportunity to work in consulting, and that was fantastic to be able to work with a wide variety of clients, a wide variety of data problems. And that was I spent several years at Deloitte building out data science teams and advanced analytics capabilities. And it was an absolutely fantastic experience. And after a few years, a company had reached out, and it was Inspire. And at that time, Inspire was only 2 years old. But what really impressed me about Inspire was their vision and their growth and how quickly they had grown. And so in 2 years, Inspire had gone from one company, one brand, Arby's, and in the span of 2 years had grown threefold by acquiring Buffalo Wild Wings, Jimmy John's, and Sonic Drive-Ins. So you had a brand that had gone from 3,500 locations in 2018 to over 11,000 locations by the end of 2019. And the vision of Inspire has always been that the franchise restaurant industry is very fractured. It tends to lag other retail companies in terms of technology adoption and customer experiences. And the belief was that, at the core of operating a franchise restaurant, you can unlock these synergies by having multiple brands under one portfolio and have shared learnings, efficiencies within your supply chain, marketing, and operations use cases. And so that was kind of the underpinning of Inspire. And I mean, I think timing is everything. And at that point, Inspire had only been around 2 years, and they've continued to grow. And so now they're the second largest restaurant company in the world. And all of those things were really compelling to me. What I really enjoyed about consulting was the sheer variety of projects that I was able to work on. And I think that's an amazing thing about the industry, is that restaurants have a wide variety of problems that they are trying to solve. They have supply chain challenges. They have customer facing challenges. Every restaurant is basically a small factory. So you have operational complexities. You have to be concerned with food safety. We also spend a lot of money on paid media and advertising. So that's a unique space. Personalization. There's very few other industries, I mean, really even within retail, that I think have all of the complexities that QSR experiences. And I think that makes it a very compelling environment for somebody interested in analytics and data science. And so that's kind of what drew me in. I've been here almost 4 years now, and I mean, there's a new challenge every day, and I think that's what makes it a great place to work.
And I mean, no pun intended, but what an inspiring moment to be part of the company as well, because it takes a strength of leadership to corral all that together and bring about those efficiencies and centers of excellence to serve what I'm sure were brands operating in isolation in their own ways of working, and to bring all those teams together to see the value. And so within your current remit and role, what would you say that generally tends to cover within Inspire?
As the senior director of data science, my main remit is to identify opportunities across use cases, across domains where our company can apply advanced analytics. And so typically that is in the form of deploying a machine learning product or an artificial intelligence product or solution that can either give Inspire a competitive advantage within QSR, or that will fundamentally empower our employees and franchisees and really provide a better guest experience, because we truly believe that if we can enhance the guest experience, that is going to power our business. And the same goes for our team members as well as our franchisees.
And what are some of the unique challenges? I mean, obviously with what you faced in consulting and finance, what would you say are some of the more unique challenges in the QSR industry specifically that you tackle with data science?
That is a great question, Sona. I think a unique challenge in QSR is the scale and the sheer number of stakeholders that you have that are all looking at a problem in a very unique way. And then as an analytics professional, trying to step into that space to try to solve some of those problems. And so an example could be something like, how do we provide reporting to, given our scale, we have 32,000 locations, we have nearly 4,000 unique franchisees, and these people are running their own business, and we need to be able to provide information, products, and services to them. And at the same time, we have over 650,000 team members. And so, this is, people's employment, and we need to be able to provide good analytics and data and products and services to them. And that sheer scale, coming back to a data and analytics organization of about 100 people, it's a huge challenge to be able to resolve all of that with stakeholders, which is not to mention executive requests and things like that. I think that's a huge challenge. It's the scale of the business and the sheer variety of work streams that we have to work across.
Mm. And so that scale aspect must bring, I guess, consideration how you approach a project, right? Because you're not dealing with, small one-off projects, but whatever you do, you have to think, okay, how am I going to scale this across the entire organization? So how does that feed into how you think about launching programs or projects?
I think that is at the heart of a lot of our considerations is the scale. And so a philosophy that we have at Inspire, across teams, and that's really a part of our DNA, is the concept of relentless standardization. And really what that comes down to is it could be how do we, optimize our paid media programming? How do we provide a better guest experience in our webs and apps? It spans it runs the gamut, but it's really around this challenge that we may have. It's going to impact every brand in some form. And so how do we provide a solution to a problem that every brand is going to face, and really trying to standardize that? And if we know that it's a really big problem, and we know it's a problem that every brand faces, then we're going to try to tackle it. And so, I think that's typically how we try to approach it, and then standardizing it. And the value of that is that we're able to collaborate across teams with a common vernacular, a common set of tools, a common understanding of the problem. And so that's how we try to tackle it across the company, which is, it is a unique challenge. I mean, we have brands that have, been around for 6 or 7 decades. They're well established. They have great traditions, and they have fantastic, business owners in the form of franchisees. It does make it a challenge to work with, so many different people, but that's also the opportunity.
Maybe another question around, the data science space and analytics space moves quite quickly, as I'm sure you've already seen in your career. And there's always new technologies. How do you approach innovation at Inspire, and making sure you're using the most relevant and efficient tools and methods to get to the outcomes you're looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of it comes to, doing a lot of reading, listening to a lot of podcasts like this one, and trying to get a sense of what's out there. And then determining, is it feasible for us to adopt something that is the most innovative, and then trying to translate that into business value. And so I think for any analytics professional, that's the most important thing, is that there are a lot of, what I would call sort of like shiny objects. In the case right now, it could be generative AI. And there's a lot of promise for the innovation of generative AI. But I think analytics professionals need to really take stock of if your company or your organization, is that going to make sense for them? What are the use cases, and what is the value that you can unlock? I think that's always important when we're thinking about innovation. And so, if it's a new problem that is pretty well established, and we can see, some new innovative solution can resolve that, then we should absolutely take it on.
I'd like to maybe turn the questions a little bit around one of the capabilities that you've talked about also with, I'm sure Inspire brands are huge advertisers in the US. And so one aspect of getting the most efficiency from advertising is optimizing that budget allocation. And so I know that you have been on a journey of internalizing marketing mix optimization capability, or a media optimization capability. How did the in-housing conversation start, in that value case of essentially building an internal team to deliver something that is somewhat traditionally provided by external vendors?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what we've seen across all of the brands that are under Inspire's portfolio is that every brand is spending a lot of money in terms of, in some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars, per brand on paid media, per year. And so there are a lot of questions that come with that. It's one of the biggest investments that a franchise restaurant company makes. And so there are a lot of different ways to try to tackle that problem. And as all the brands have kind of come together, everyone has slightly different vernacular. Everyone has slightly different partners, whether that's media partners or that is the analytics professionals and agencies that are trying to answer the questions around how are we, optimizing our paid media and targeting. And so it made a lot of sense for that to be internalized, because that is a problem that a franchise restaurant company faces now. It is going to be a problem that a franchise restaurant has to solve a year from now. And really, as long as there are franchise restaurants, that is going to be something that is done, is investing heavily into paid media. And so it made a lot of sense for coming back to relentless standardization, for us to have that, to not just unlock shared learnings of paid media tactics for one brand and how does that play into paid media tactics for another brand. And so that really does tap into the concept and the motivation of like synergistic effects of Inspire and having, multiple QSR brands under one company. So it's been, our focus from the beginning is we knew that we were going to internalize because it just made sense, and that it would actually provide us a competitive advantage, while also probably providing like the most relevant content to guests.
And we know from experience also that internalization of MMO is a big undertaking. There's not only the data science skills, there's the subject matter expertise, there's the media skills to bring in, as well as everything you need to organize around data and stakeholders and how you deliver. What were the key challenges that you faced at Inspire in bringing that capability in-house?
Yeah, I think there have been a lot of challenges, but I think the biggest enabler to unlocking that is leadership buy-in from the beginning and taking a long-term view of the investment. So to internalize an MO model, a lot of investment does need to be made in data architecture, into getting databases and data warehouses set up. We work with a lot of different agencies to try to enable this data. It's a very complex undertaking that will likely not reap a lot of benefits in a few weeks or in a couple of months. And so luckily at Inspire, though, we have leadership who is willing to look at the long-term benefits and recognize that. And so that has been a key enabler. I'd say really the biggest challenge is it's the process change, getting data in, getting the processes set up, and then as well as the change management piece. So you have a lot of different stakeholders who are used to ingesting and consuming analytics and insights from a particular set of teams, from external agencies, or having a certain set of vernacular and customs for how to digest that data, and trying to standardize all of that and across 6 different brands is a challenge. And so I think what helped again is leadership buy-in, and then taking the long view. And another enabler is transparency, is by making things, because it's in-house, we are able to share that with our internal stakeholders, and that has really helped us go a long way in terms of getting buy-in and trust into what we're providing.
And so two major challenges there around stakeholder alignment and the needs, as well as the data and the technical challenge. Mm-hmm. What were some of the specific challenges you came across, and how you solved them in getting to that standardized model ready data from the sources through to what's usable directly in the models? Could you give a couple of examples of what they were and how you solved for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think anytime that somebody has an analytics product or service that the output of that is some set of information, and people are used to consuming that, and you change that process in some way, the biggest challenge that a lot of people I think will run into is if the numbers don't match up to people's previous expectations. And media optimization, I think, is no stranger to that. And so, there be instances where a certain brand will invest a certain amount in a certain channel, and they historically expect some kind of return on that, or an impact that may have on sales or transactions. And in in-housing a lot of this, some of those numbers may change. And so rightfully so, there's some questions around why. Well, why is that changing? And I mean, part of it is the data can change, the methodology can change. There's a lot of change going on. But I think the biggest enabler to kind of like cross that chasm is to be able to provide transparency. And I think one thing that has been so beneficial for my consulting background was when I was at Deloitte, we adopted this philosophy of what we called conversational analytics. And so the crux of that is trying to take the idea of advanced analytics, data science, and taking it out of the white tower and making it this opaque, complicated matter that is, left to only a few experts, but making it more conversational so that you create space for people to ask questions and truly understand what's going on. And so that is the philosophy and approach that we've taken at Inspire, especially with things like our media optimization. The most important thing is making sure that you have your stakeholders coming with you along the way. And I mean, the trust that you can build there is going to just pay itself back tenfold in terms of what can be delivered and making sure you're doing the right thing for the company.
I think that's really a challenge that we see a lot in globalization or centralization of capabilities, where, for example, your individual brands might have been used to a certain way of having delivery, having the comfort of what they know they can get from the capability, and in a way, the new capability build with all its standardization is almost like a step back to take 2 or 3 steps forward. How was that conversation, and how were you able to bring them on board to that vision of where you want it to go with the capability?
Yeah, that is a great question. I do think it does. A lot of things come back towards having a leadership buy-in that is looking at willing to make a long-term expensive investment into something that may not necessarily pay off in a week or a month. But if you think about a franchise restaurant company and all the levers that you have to drive your business, paid media and targeted advertising is really one of the biggest levers that a company has. And so making sure that it's done right is more important than doing it fast. And so by getting that buy-in, we can kind of lay that foundation. And I think that's kind of baked into the concept that I alluded to earlier around relentless standardization. Is we're not just building this for one brand, but we're trying to build something for a portfolio of brands. And so that conversation tends to go better with executive leadership around. We're not doing this for an Arby's or a Baskin Robbins. We're not just doing it for one, but this is going to enable us for the entire portfolio. And so that is, I think, for any QSR company that holds multiple brands, I think they'll have similar conversations that everyone will benefit from, adopting a standardized approach like that.
And so now with the capability in place, what are you seeing as some of the key successes and benefits it has brought to the business at its current stage?
Yeah, great question. I think what we are seeing is there's decisions that are being made that are less gut feel, that are just based on people's intuition. There always is that, and that applies to not just media strategy and planning or media purchasing. Or it spans, operations as well as supply chain, but it's making a more data-driven decision. And it's really the combination of both that we're confident at Inspire culturally that really it's the combination of those two is typically where you're going to get the best decision. And so with the transparency that we've provided to the model, that's led to a lot of trust. And through that trust, it's led towards, well, what else can we do? Or hey, we're used to this kind of output, for media optimization. Well, can you all do something similar in, perhaps our biddable space or operations with how we schedule labor? So it's kind of, I think, had kind of a positive domino effect where once you get that trust set up, it's going to open all these other doors of like, well, what else can we do?
And so we also know that internalization might not be for everyone. It's a long journey, and what advice? Well, first of all, what do you think brands should consider before deciding whether they should or should not internalize? And if you did have any advice for someone embarking on that journey, what would that be?
I would say take a long and hard look at the use cases you're considering to internalize. And does it make sense given the level of investment that you make? And is it something that you will intend to do, long term for several years in advance? And if you do, I think then the other pieces of advice would be to be patient. It is a very complex undertaking. You will need to take the long view, and you're going to need to incorporate a lot of people into the process and to adopt that change. And I mean, change is hard. And change is hard, especially within large matrix organizations. And if you have that leadership buy-in, it makes it so much easier. And the other would just be to make sure to invest into your data infrastructure, right the first time, because doing that right saves a lot of, what we would call like technical debt or resolving downstream issues later. I would say those are the pieces of advice I would give.
Very, very valuable pieces of advice. I guess as maybe a last question, what are you most excited about in the next stage of the capability, or in general in the data science space that you're working on?
I mean, I think it would probably be no surprise to say that we're really hitting a unique moment in terms of the development and maturity of commercializing artificial intelligence. It's really tough to say where things will go in the next year. I mean, even this week, the White House released an executive order and has included an artificial intelligence bill of rights. So I think that, not just from a regulatory perspective, but from a commercial enterprise perspective across industries that aren't even necessarily as heavily regulated, we're going to see a big transformation in terms of not just generative AI, but I think artificial intelligence in general, that more people are going to ask, how do we use this to unlock business? And I think the challenge there will be making sure that it's being done ethically with safeguards, and there will be a lot of scrutiny and transparency around that, which is sort of a challenge. But that's definitely the most exciting, I think, arena of who knows what is that going to look like even 5 years from now.
So thank you so much, Richard, for your time and a very interesting conversation that we've had. Highlighting some of the ways that you grapple with scale, the relentless obsession with standardization that is really necessary to make this work. I also loved hearing about this conversational analytics, the leadership buy-in and the patience that is required to make something like marketing optimization, internalization really work, which is a really complex undertaking. So a lot of interesting insights there. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
This has been great, Sona. Thanks for the time.